This is business like you've never thought about it before. Good evening and welcome to the boardroom. By the end of 2010, TransCentury had invested and gotten shareholding of 34% in RVR, Rift Valley Railways, alongside other institutional investors, Citadel Capital and Bomi Holdings of Uganda. However, 7 years after they made the first investment, they decided to pull out of the investment and sell their shareholding to Citadel Capital. Now, in the wake of the nascent oil and gas industry, and at a time when we think that Rift Valley Railways' fortunes are turning around, why would this decision be made? Join me as we talk about this and about where TransCentury plans to go on from here. I'm joined on the panel of discussion today from my extreme right by Mr. Jack Rono, who's a stock market enthusiast, a husband and a father. I also have Dr. Gashal Kuna, who's the CEO of TransCentury. Thank you for being here with us. On my left, I have Mr. John Sonderi, who's manager, capital finance and advisory at ABC Capital, and Dr. Fred Ogola, who's an MBA strategy lecturer at the Strathmore Business School. So I'm just going to start off by asking the question on our minds, and this is going to be directed at Dr. Kuna. Why is it that 7 years after you invested in RVR, Rift Valley Railways, you would choose to get rid of this investment? And especially at a time when we think that there's so much potential in this kind of rail infrastructure by virtue of the oil and gas industry?
I think even without the oil and gas industry, there's a lot of potential in the rail infrastructure. That potential was there even 7 years ago, before the oil and gas boom that's here with us now had been discovered. So from a TransCentury perspective, we have never doubted the potential of the railways and the potential of RVR. But unfortunately, there's always a bridge to cross between what is a potential of a business and how you actually execute to get that potential out of the business. And unfortunately, in the case of RVR, there were too many challenges that were not in our control, really, for us to allow us to cross that bridge from potential to execution.
Now I'm thinking to myself, could it be the case that investment in the road sector, now the trucks and whatnot, have created a system that is much more friendly to those who are brought in cargo from wherever into the country? Could that have been an aspect that maybe was overlooked?
The challenge with railways is that they require a lot of capital. Okay, and when you're running a railway unprofitably and you're not making money, which is what was happening in the case of the Kenya Railways, the first thing you cut is the long-term plans, right? So you had plans to expand, to do new branch lines, to maybe even go into new countries, to buy more rolling stock, to grow, right? You cut that. Nobody really notices that because those are plans for the future.
Because you didn't have majority shareholding, were you not able to influence these decisions as TransCentury?
You need to be able to control two things. One is management, and the second is your capital, how you put money into the business. If you look at the big failing that in our opinion, that happened at RVR, was much more in the form of capital than in management.
I would like to know the way forward now that you exited from RVR, because the exit itself meant that there was a dip above about 10% at the point of exit when I just started buying TransCentury shares. So as an ordinary shareholder, I would like to know which projects are you going into, so that I can also sit in and look at where will we be 5 years. I'm calling we because I'm interested and I'm a shareholder now in TransCentury.
I like the question Jack has asked, but we need to go on a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about what TransCentury has for us in the future as shareholders and as interested parties. See you after the break. Good evening and welcome back to the boardroom. We'll pick up right from where we left off, where Jack had a question about safeguarding shareholder value.
Great. Dr. Kuna, my interest is obviously from a shareholder point of view. At the time when you exited RBR, I just started buying shares in anticipation of a 5-year plan to probably 10 years. I learned very well from insurance, because insurance will always take your money and give you after 10 years or more. So I want to know where you're headed with this now that I have put in some money and I intend to put in more, but the exit actually costs a 10% drop in the share price.
It's a good question. I think my advice has always been that if you invest in any stock and not just TransCentury, you really need to understand at least the medium to long-term view of the stock. Because if you're investing only for the short term, then it's really quite speculative, right? Because you really don't know how's the company going to perform, how's the market. There's too many variables. But in the long term, you should be able to see it. So a couple of things to mention. One is the people who originally invested in TransCentury when we did our first investment 10 years ago in 2004, have probably made somewhere between 100 and 150 times their money today, okay? But they've taken a very long-term view. They only put in the famous 24 million shillings, which today, even with the depressed market cap, is still worth, somewhere close to 10 billion Kenya shillings, okay? So, but they've taken a long-term view. The company has transformed over time. There have been many different events, some good, some not so good, but in the long run, there's been a lot of growth.
I think I want a strategy question, so let's come to Dr. Gono.
Yes, what have you learned? Going forward, have you put up any policy that would guide investment in future? Because there's some company which says that we'll never be number 2 or number 3 somewhere. Can you say maybe whenever we don't have 50%, we'll never get into investment? That's my first question. The second question is that which reputation do you have after doing that? Because some people can say that lead essentially they'll come here, if they can't hack it, they leave. So because you are expanding, and this could be like an image or reputation kind of implications which you have.
Okay, those are two great questions. Maybe a little bit around, the TransCentury has only been in a minority position twice. It is not our preference to be a minority shareholder, okay? And where we're not a minority shareholder, we don't end up there by chance. We knew we were going to be a minority in RVR. We knew we were going to be a minority in SAB. So the question is, you can't always be the majority shareholder because that also cuts out opportunities, right? So what you really have to do is to say, well, in circumstances where I still really like the business, but I can't get in there as a majority, how do I really make sure that I really have a seat on the table? So that's where you see TransCentury will always have a significant stake. And typically, if it's not the largest shareholder, it's the second largest. It'll always have a high involvement in the board. And it will always have, if it's a minority, some window to exit and preserve its capital.
And if TransCentury didn't hack it, so where does that leave us? Where does that leave us as Kenyans? So the standard gauge really, which is going to take a couple of years to actually become operational, but there's RVR, which is now Citadel Capital in Uganda, so there's Egyptians and there's Ugandans, and there's no Kenyan farm. And that, I think, would cause a bit of discomfort for us who are sitting back thinking, so what next now?
Capital allocation and how we think about capital allocation is very important. And just to build on his point, there's the savings point and how we make sure that we actually disintermediate all of the domestic savings, which is something that we don't do well. But once we have those savings, capital and time is scarce. So you have to direct it into the right areas.
And I think that's a really great note. And because we are running out of time, I have to wind this up. I think the most important thing that we've learned today is that in terms of making an investment, we need to think about domestic direct investment because that's where our true power lies. And we need to have a little faith in ourselves and our industries. Thank you for joining us and have a good day.